The first time I ever heard Krista Monson speak, she comes out on stage with all of these pieces of luggage, like these old leather suitcases and a satchel. And she's like coming out onto the stage of this conference we were both speaking at called Story. And she like plops everything down. And she's this dancer of a person. So her movement has this interesting, like, lyrical quality to it. And then she begins talking in this beautiful Canadian accent around, I think that we need to re-examine how we use the word just. And I remember sitting back in my seat going, oh my gosh, she's so right. I don't even know what she's going to say, but I could recognize, even in just that moment, how we use the word just. And so we were so excited to have her on the Joyosity podcast this month. And if you're new to us here at the Joyosity podcast, you are welcome. This is for seasoned leaders, people who are new to leadership. We're so glad that you're here. And because I think repetition is a mercy, these are the three things we talk about all the time. The first thing is true leadership requires more than just surface level strategies. It requires a profound connection to everything that makes us human. Number two, curiosity matters. And if we have genuine curiosity, we really can create positive culture with all of the complex people that you work with, because those are the only people you have to work with. And joy is the heartbeat of a healthy leader and a healthy organization that brings us all the business things we always wanted anyway. So we put joy and fun and play right in the center of our work. And in this episode, Shelby and I recap what did we learn from the podcast for the month. So I'm Jen Whitmer, international speaker and a leadership consultant and all-around joy bringer. And Shelby, why don't you tell us who you are and what you do as my Chief Gen Officer and owner of Sunshine Lane?
Yes. Well, I am Shelby. Yes, I own Sunshine Lane, which is a group of us, mostly stay-at-home parents who support people with live shows and podcasts and do some VA work. And it brings me a lot of joy to be a part of these conversations and get to learn from really interesting people like Krista this month. I loved these episodes with her. And I'm also a mother of two that's kind of my most important role, I would say.
I think I get very excited when your two nuggets show up on meetings. It's one of my favorite times.
It is my favorite that everybody I work with feels that way. I love to hear that because that has been something I've struggled with as I've grown the business is I have to have my children around for things and I have to work with people who are comfortable with that. And it has been such a blessing to find folks who are. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And so in this episode, Shelby and I we love to talk about what did we learn, because we work together and as co-workers, and I mean, technically I lead Shelby, but I think Shelby leads me a lot.
I prod you. I always say I'm a professional squeaky wheel. That's my title.
And how does the concepts of, like, this month we were talking about connection and connection being the glue of leadership, and Krista giving us so much wisdom. How did that show up for us in our lives? So if you've got, pen and pencil, you might want to grab it. I also have always multiple beverages. I'm learning to have the prettier beverage rather than my nasty cup, So what are some of the things, as you've been listening to Krista this month talking about disruption and connection and her toolkit, what are some of the things that came up for you in applying what we have been learning?
The biggest thing that's been on my mind over and over again is trusting your intuition. That one I needed to hear. And I needed it this month specifically, because I've just realized that that's something as I get older that I like question more. I think that it should be the opposite for a lot of people, but I was always a very like curious, intuitive child, and I think that I felt too sensitive. I felt too too soft in ways. And I would put off that intuition a little bit to be more normal, right? And listening to Krista, I was like, I don't want to be normal. Like, was like, "Krista's not normal, and she is brilliant," and I'm
Uh-huh.
like, "That is" like, the way she shows up is just so herself, and you can just tell that she has brought that through her career, through her life, of just, like, this, like, here's what I am, here's what I have to offer, and trust me on it." You know
Yeah,
what I mean? And I'm like, "Oh my gosh," like, yes, yes. The trusting the intuition and how hard that can be was something that I kinda had in my brain all month long.
absolutely. And, if I think about when we talk about normal, I think Krista is still normal. I think she's uncommon.
Yes.
Like there's so many different options for normal.
Yeah, what does normal even mean?
What does normal mean? What's normal to me, what's normal to you? But I think we get caught in that.
Yeah,
Well, that was her point when she's dragging these
that's
suitcases
it,
out
yeah.
of I can never say it. The Nashville Symphony Hall is the Schmergerhorn. I'm gonna say it wrong. Whatever. It's something. Anyway, so she's dragging these suitcases out and talking about the word just. That was her point. We
Yeah,
diminish what we are doing. We make ourselves smaller to fit in what we think normal.
mhm.
Like what do we and I catch myself saying just. It was funny as I was re-listening to the podcast and I caught myself saying just in the podcast and corrected it while I was asking her a question. It's live, it's in real time, and it's a practice. It's not like, oh, I'm simply going to stop saying this word. You can't do that. It is an awareness first and then practice. It's
That
practice.
and that has been so huge for my business because, I've been doing this for 4 years, and I have always made it sound like I just help with podcasts. I just help with live shows. I just do this thing from home while I have my kids around. Like
Mhm.
I have struggled really, really hard as a business owner to step into like I'm actually really good at it and I
Yeah.
actually really enjoy it. And like here's my ideas for it. That kind of thing. And so hearing that again of like, get rid of the just. We don't need that word. Like
Mhm.
there is so like, I loved the way that she, kind of drew in different roles that she's seen of people who have done that, because
Mhm.
it's like it spanned, like, C-suite to, like, waitresses, and she was like,
Yes.
"Literally every one of you needs to stop saying just."
Yeah.
Like
And I think it's a particular problem for women.
yeah,
I don't say that lightly. I think I don't hear men saying that as much. So if you are a man listening, I'm super curious. Like, let us know if you struggle with that. And if you are
I
a man,
will interrupt you on that one.
okay,
My husband is bad about that.
interesting.
And
Yeah.
I struggle with, like, I wanna just shake him when he, like, diminishes the things that he's done and the things that, like, uses that just a little bit, and I'm like so I will say I think there are men that
Interesting.
do
Yeah.
that
I
more.
don't hear it as much, I think maybe. Or I hear it in spaces, and this is where women do it too, where we feel uncomfortable with our own success or skill set or our
Mhm.
own level of magic that we bring to the world. And I wonder sometimes, I think for me, one, I'm uncomfortable with success. I was talking to a friend yesterday about this, and he brilliantly asked, "What will make you feel comfortable with that?" And I was like, "Oh, wow. Well, that's a good
Hmm.
question."
Yeah.
I'm uncomfortable with our own success, or we genuinely don't realize it's something special. I
Yeah.
think those are the 2 places it comes out the most.
And I would say the latter well, actually, that's a lie, both are true for me too. Because I do think a lot of times, like, your secret sauce, what makes you special, you're just like, well, you're just like, "Eh, it's just who I am,"
Mhm,
but it's so much more than that. So I
mhm.
love Krista's reminder of that. I thought that was really, really beautiful.
It was really powerful.
Yeah.
The other thing that I kept thinking about all month was the power of disruption. And at the same time that Krista, we published the podcast and I was re-listening to it, this reel of Reese Witherspoon continued, like, I don't know what happened, why Reese got on my feed for every other, it was like, here, listen to this. And I was like, yes, I need to listen again. Cause she just kept saying, pick up the phone. And even if you're not in a sales job or in a role where you have to connect with clients in that way. Maybe you're not in business development per se, but you are in a role where you do need to connect with other people.
Mhm.
And so sometimes picking up the phone is before it's necessary, like before
Yeah.
you need something. And so I've been thinking a lot about that as well. Like, what does it mean to pick up the phone and just build simply, gosh, my goodness, now when we start saying the word just,
No.
to build connection and the power of building connection rather than thinking, oh, I don't want to bother them. I
Mhm.
don't want to like, I think that's the thing that we think. Everybody's busy.
Mhm.
I don't know about you, but every time I somebody calls me and is like, "I know that you're busy, and I just wanna," I am
Mhm.
often feeling very lonely. Like,
Yeah.
I'm busy, but I'm lonely. So, not even a business transaction,
Yeah.
the picking up the phone and the connection of making things happen is the foundation, the relational foundation is what you need later when you do pick up the phone for a business reason.
Right.
That's what I've been thinking about a lot.
Right. And I think the whole idea of like building I in our home we call it like a trust bank. I don't know if you've
Mhm.
heard
Oh,
that
yeah.
term,
Yeah,
but
but
like
share with the trust bank because I think it's such a
yeah,
powerful idea.
you basically little I don't know how do you like
Deposit.
little coins,
Yeah.
deposits, that's the word
Mhm.
I'm yeah, of little trust moments that build up over time. And then at some point you probably have to take a withdrawal and having that you know, that built up is huge with relationships. We've seen that a lot these past 2 months with the storm in our community. It's people
Mhm.
who've had relationships prior to the like, what's the word? The disaster
Yeah.
is where because if you trust them, like, all over Facebook, it's been like, "Do you know this person personally, or do you just know them from this?" And so, like, everybody being like, "Oh, okay, I know Trisha because of this and this and this," because there's so much communication happening that's short, that is like, it's not built out. I'll give an example. There was somebody who posted on a Facebook page saying they needed some funds to help a family get in a hotel. And there was like confusion on the page of like, is this a trustworthy person? Do we
Mhm.
send the funds to this person? Because the post was not, it was not a complete thought. I think she must have just fired it off while she was with the family and she
Mm.
posted her Cash App and everybody was like, this seems spammy, this feels weird. And there was multiple people who jumped in the comments. They're like, no, Trisha was just down here. We know her. We trust her. And then sure enough, when Trisha had a moment to breathe, she came back and explained the whole story of like, oh, here's why I did it this way. And I'm sorry I didn't like communicate it more. But because she had built up that trust in our community, it was
Yeah,
like, nope, we know her. She's good. Like it was so much quicker and smoother than somebody who hadn't. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
yeah.
Well, and I've been thinking about this a lot, the disruption, the pick up the phone, when does it happen? So there is the connecting because I wanna connect with somebody
Mhm.
that makes it non-transactional. Like, I wanna connect with you. We will make transactions,
Yeah.
but I don't want our relationship to be transactional,
Right.
and that requires just calling people, picking up the phone, connecting, saying we're gonna have coffee, and, sometimes that is really hard, like, genuinely, like, we were talking in Slack today of, like, "Do you want me to schedule this coffee? Can I schedule this coffee?"
Yeah.
Like, sometimes that's challenging,
The
but I think
logistics. Yeah.
forgotten that we do have this thing that doesn't just scroll. Like, I can actually talk to you on the phone, and if you're millennial and you just freaked out right now or Gen Z, I promise it's okay. There's a lot of power in that, and, uh, I was also at something else I learned this week that reminded me of Krista, of, making the unreasonable asks,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
asking big things that feel unreasonable, but we have to practice that,
Yeah.
and sometimes practicing saying, "I'm going to ask you an unreasonable ask, and it's okay if you say
I like
no,"
that. Yeah.
which is a little bit of one of her toolkits of, like, the dance with chaos, or I call it the
Yes.
cha-cha with failure, like, we have to practice that in little ways, and I've been thinking about how am I actually practicing those unreasonable asks, those connections, because if I'm never failing, I'm really not
Mhm.
trying, and that's been in my mind a lot this month.
I also really loved one of her, toolkit pieces was having a high regard for people.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, Oh, I have never
Yes.
heard it worded so beautifully because it's like, yes, like,
Mhm.
I don't know, that really, really spoke to me, that one, of her on her toolkit, I
Yeah.
thought was really cool.
And the way that you know you're not having a high regard for people. So here are the red flags, either
Mhm.
for yourself or watching other people if you don't have a high regard for people. Um, you can be dismissive. That's a pretty mild disregard. Dismissive of their idea, whatever. Like that happens pretty frequently, but just notice when people are dismissive. Well, that won't work because blah blah blah. Or well, they can't be trusted because blah blah blah. Something that feels mild. But the thing that I notice out in the world that we're very tempted to do is dehumanizing language. So whenever you take the human out of the language and you label them as an idiot, you label them as, well, they're just a monkey in the circus, or like you start labeling people with
Without that, yeah,
yeah, you dehumanize them. That's when your regard for people has either disappeared or is low, if I'm being
yeah,
generous. And it is one of the things that even people I vehemently disagree with. I mean, I have yet to be able to find the common ground, and I have tried.
yeah,
I refuse to dehumanize them.
yeah,
Refuse. Like who they are as a person, no matter how much I disagree with them, they still are a human and a person with great value. And
yeah.
I think that I was so happy that she said that. Even though we did it quickly in the podcast, I thought about that when I was re-listening, like high regard for
I loved that one, that, like, I was like, I've never had the words um for that, like, that
Mhm,
idea, that value, I guess,
mhm.
because when she said that, I was like, "Yes." Like, that is what is so important to me about the people that I have in my life, like, that is an important thing for people around me to have, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? I loved that, and I also loved she had at some point, she said something about or maybe it was you that said something about when, emotion is high, intelligence is low.
Oh, yes.
And I thought that was really powerful too because,
Mhm.
like, sometimes when our emotions get up here, sometimes we just, like our thinking brain isn't doing what it needs to do, and
Yeah,
it's like
yeah. Well, literally, and emotions are an important part of intelligence, but if they are leading, we're
yeah,
all in trouble. Like, because 'cause they're too fleeting and they're too volatile. They're important, we
mhm,
need them, we don't need to disregard them, but, ooh, if they're leading, we are in for a bumpy ride.
yes,
And, that is yeah, they're not always gonna take us where we wanna go.
yes. Oh, no, my little one's crying, I don't know if you can hear that. She's
Speaking of speaking of
but I
emotions high.
yeah, emotions being high. I did love too when you pointed out that we stop breathing when we check our email. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's when I read that research study, I was like, "Duh." Like, how did
Yeah,
we not know that? Because there's
I feel it.
I
When
feel
you
it
said
too.
that, I was like, "Duh, that makes so much sense."
Yes, I feel and I have to remind myself. I've thought about, like, what is a way I can automatically get a pop-up before I open my email
Yeah,
that says "breathe"? Like, I haven't figured that out yet. So if somebody's a coder and that is your magic out in the world, I would actually literally pay for that pop-up.
a little thing that says, "Remember to breathe as you read through these." Like,
Remember to
okay.
breathe. And I love the other thing that she said, besides that breathing can also be this very simple practice of connecting with the sublime,
Yes.
of being in nature, of connecting these amazing business outcomes that she had because she had made space for connecting with nature. And I mean, I
You
want
know, I was like this on
oh,
that
of
one.
course you were. You were like, "Let me show you my tea. Let me show you my garden haul."
Yeah, exactly. When she was talking about laying down and looking at the bumblebees, I
Uh-huh.
was like, "Oh my gosh," like, to hear a woman who's so successful doing these incredible shows,
And
that's
in charge of billions of dollars.
well, and when
In
she
the
said,
lives
"You
of
have to
people.
create a show that feeds people for 2 years," or whatever, I was
Yes!
like, "Oh my word."
N
Like
no pressure, and so, yeah, like, the idea that if she is in charge of all those people, if their lives are in her hands and then you finish the story about the bumblebees.
yeah, and that's where her, idea came for something in the show, right? There was some
Mhm.
sort of she choreographs, and that was her idea of laying down and watching the bees, and I have that moment often, I try really, hard once a day, I sign off of my work at 3 o'clock, and I go outside with my kids for 30 minutes without my phone or any distractions. And then sometimes I have to come back and do other things. But when I lose that, I lose so much of my like creativity first and foremost. And then second is like I'm not as clear at work either. If I don't spend that 30 minutes without my phone, without the distractions, which
Mhm.
some days feels impossible. It feels impossible to put my phone like cuz if I go outside I don't have service. So, if
Mhm.
I when I do that, I'm like there's no way I got to wait and hear back on this from that and this and then I go out and I realize 30 minutes isn't going to kill anybody. Especially
Mhm.
with the work that I do, like,
Right.
it'll be okay, and then usually I come back with an idea of how to solve the problem that I thought was unsolvable when I was sitting in front of my computer.
Yeah, and there's so much pressure. She talked about having the courage. I think there is courage in that.
Yeah.
Like, courage was one of the pieces of the survival kit, and it takes courage in a world that says you always have to be available to say, "I'm
Yeah.
gonna not be." There's another author, oh gosh, I wish I could remember her name. I'll have to find it and we'll put it in the show notes, who's recently written a book around the untethered hour, I think is what she calls it, but
Mhm.
basically this intentional hour of putting your phone, putting distractions away. When is that intentional hour, and what are you going to do with that? And she even talks a little bit about how sometimes the intentional time is to not do anything. Like there is this like, I'll see what happens, but the intention is I'm spending this hour. I'm investing this hour away from screen, technology, phone, whatever that is. And it feels so brave and counterintuitive that the business outcomes that came from that.
Yes.
Because in our business world, I mean, if you're a leader, there's a budget meeting, there's a kickoff meeting, I got to respond to this client. And if I don't respond to this client right away, then there's this fast-paced pressure
Mhm.
that we create that
Yeah,
isn't real. Uh,
that's the interesting thing is sometimes when you take a step back, you're like, "Wait a second, I was doing that to myself?"
mhm,
And then it's like, I don't have anybody to blame.
right.
I can't blame my clients, I can't blame my like, it's like, "Oh, that was me." And now, like, stepping back into it, you can kind of have, like, a clearer head of how to avoid that in the future, but it always comes back for me. I gotta figure that out because
Yeah.
it always speeds up again, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's our human nature and why
Yeah,
it's a practice and not a one-time thing.
yeah.
And so, like, I have been practicing yoga, and practice is a very loose term in that. But I do yoga a couple times, maybe more now a week, but it is a practice. And some days I get so frustrated. I'm like, I could do this 2 days ago. Like,
Mhm.
why can't I do this move today? And it reminds me of just my humanity that is well, the cha-cha with failure, and even though that's not really failure, maybe it's the cha-cha with growth, that it is a little bit of back and forth, and that doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong or I've failed or it's bad. It's that is the way the world works, and if rather than, like, not face that reality, like, accepting that
Mhm.
definitely makes things more aligned. I have more clarity. Um, I don't go into a shame spiral, and the
Yes.
leadership outcomes of that are so much better because I'm welcoming new ideas. I'm asking other people for things. And regardless of the industry that you are in, you want the other perspectives because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And it's really powerful.
Well, and that idea, I love yoga. That's, like, always been something that
Mhm.
I've done, for, like, years, and, it's funny you bring that up because when I first started practicing yoga, I wanted to be, so good at it, you know what I mean? Like, I wanted to do it all right,
I
and
want my feet flat on my downward dog.
yeah, and if the instructor, like, made a joke, I was like, "We are not here for that, like, we are, like" We're here to get zen and calm and all of those things, right? And then over the years, especially with my babies, like, as I've had kids, sometimes when I'm doing yoga, almost all the time when I'm doing yoga, I have little people crawling all over me.
Mhm.
And I used to feel frustrated about that because I couldn't get in the position just right and couldn't do the thing just right. And learning that that's part of it is like managing that as you practice is huge. And to hear it in kind of like a business way repeated back to me, like you're saying, is interesting because I think a lot of times I think like, I'm just Shelby. I'm not qualified enough to
Mhm.
be this leader. I just have these people working for me. And like, it's funny as my team grows, I just have 6 people. And like, then when I repeat it back to people, they're like, look at me like, that's not a just thing. You know what I mean? Like, that's a big deal. And I'm like, oh yeah, like that is a big deal. Like, I just, that idea, just the idea of like, it can, it cannot feel great and you're still growing, right?
Yes. Well, Carl Jung has I'm paraphrasing, so this is not a quote, this is a paraphrase, but basically he's like, discomfort is required in growth. Like
Yeah.
the psychological discomfort literally is part of your brain cells growing into a new groove. So brain cells are like, all wrapped over in those neurons together. And you literally cannot grow without discomfort, which as an Enneagram 7, I'm like, are you sure? Can't we find another way? But being comfortable and knowing that that doesn't mean I think for me, knowing that that is part of the process, that I haven't missed something because I'm uncomfortable. Like, oh, I'm not growing right because it's
Mhm.
uncomfortable. Like that's kind of where I often go it's been really helpful for me. Because whew, not a fan of the discomfort.
The cha-cha with failure and discomfort, not very fun all the time.
Yeah, right. That's why I call it a cha-cha because it makes at least a little bit of fun.
Yeah.
Uh, I think the other thing that I keep coming back to that Krista said that was so powerful for me was all the things that we dismiss. She talked about she herself as a dancer and choreographer and then artistic director and like as she continued to move up the ladder, um,
Mm.
the disconnection with the work that she loves, like how do you
Yes.
bring that connection back? But also the dismissal of the things that keep you healthy. Actually, if she's like, if I would have embraced the yoga, the breathing, the physical things that help me, I wouldn't have burnt out doing what I
Yeah.
love. And I've thought a lot about this. So the past week, 2 weeks I was on, I don't even 8 planes. 8 planes. I was in 7 cities. Like it was real wild. And it wasn't totally planned, but being at different speaking events and all of that, I love that. I got to see all these people that I loved. I got to speak to big companies like Chick-fil-A and Intuit and like these things that I love doing. But I continually had to remind myself, okay, I'm going to leave this party early or not early. I'm going to leave the party on time because I'm not leaving early,
You're
but
fine.
go to bed.
Yeah.
It's like I need to sleep. I need to make sure that I do the breathing exercise or the workout. And because Krista's words were just in my head, because I don't want to burn out doing what I
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we burn out because it's awful, like you're in a toxic
Right.
environment, too much responsibility or, lack of resources. But we can also do it to ourselves.
Yeah,
And
and I think that as a business owner, that's actually been on my mind a little bit because, you're so in charge of your schedule and your workload and all of that, that it's hard because you're like, "I am doing it to myself, and I love what I'm doing, but I'm making myself not love it as much by not taking care of myself."
yeah.
That space is so hard,
Mhm.
and kinda hearing Krista talk through this beautiful, successful career and, like, the lessons that she learned were really, really powerful for me, where I'm at in my career because it's like, "Oh, like, it doesn't matter how much money you're making, how cool the project is that you're working on, like, these core things that keep you healthy is the only way for a successful life, right? In my opinion, that
Yeah.
is what success is to me is like feeling good. Physically,
Mhm.
spiritually, all of the emotionally, all the things. Like
Mhm.
that's what I want for me, that's what I want for my kids, and I don't know if there's a job title or a number in my bank account that gets that for you, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's because we're whole people.
Yeah.
Like we are whole people. You can't and every word we have that describes stress is something that is disconnected. I
Mm,
feel like things are falling apart. I
yeah,
feel shattered. I feel like all the words that describe that are separation and we want wholeness. And that's why that David White quote I say all the time, the cure for exhaustion isn't always rest, it's wholeheartedness.
Yeah.
It's wholeness. That's what we want. And it's a challenge to do that because we have so many competing messages in the world. And so I just appreciated Krista's wisdom and that survival kit of things, and how she described in the first episode about you have to decide what more is for you.
Yeah.
You have to decide what more is for you. And I had offered on a podcast a Joyosity Explorer map. So if you want that, we'll put that in the show notes because it's a great exercise to figure out, well, what does actually bring me joy? What brings me joy? What drains my joy? What is the more for me? Because sometimes, these words are too big. Finding my passion or what more.
The passion. I was going to bring that up. Her like, she's like, I don't know, like passion. I'm curious about things, but yeah, I was like, oh, that made so much more sense to me too. Of like, I don't have to find my passion. I just have to follow my curiosity. Okay.
Yeah, it lowers pressure so much. And having a guide or a map also like brings a sense of grounding and stability because it's too hard to figure out when you're so busy, not breathing while you're checking your email and making sure your calendar is up to date. You have to take some time, and having a guide in that space is really helpful. There's so many great things that she talked about. And I hope that as you are listening, if you didn't get a chance to go back and listen to Krista's episodes, because we're recapping what we learned, but in case you missed it, but I highly recommend. I think these are some of the favorite episodes that we've done.
Yeah. I think part 2 with the 8 tools was my very favorite. I loved that. I loved the wisdom that she brought there. And now I want to be Krista's friend. So
right. Oh yeah. Yeah. Low key, she may not know this, but I'm going to be calling her often as a mentor. Hey, this is what's happening. Yes. Well, thank you so much I always love your perspective and being here and our chats about what happened in the month. And
it's fun to have like this idea of role, like as I listen to the different podcasts of like how is this going to show up, and then watching it show up throughout the month, and it's fun for me.
It's great. It's great. Well, everybody, join us next week. I'm going to be talking about how do you lead when people disagree. So make sure you tune in for that. I have some tools for you, so don't worry. So have a great week, everybody. So let me put my coach hat on for just a moment. Don't just leave this here. Take a moment. What did you learn? What's your next tiny action step? Share this episode with someone and tell them what you're going to do. Check the show notes for all the links and connect with us on LinkedIn and all the other socials, or just, drop me an email at Jen with 2 N's at jenwhitmer.com. We want to keep this conversation going with you. I know your earballs have a lot coming at them, so thank you for listening to the Joyosity podcast and being a part of our community. Please take a moment to rate and subscribe. It helps more people join us in the movement to create positive culture with complex people. So work is a joy, people are whole, and organizations flourish. Can't wait for you to join us next week.